happen. What I came up with was what you're going to get, and we'll see where we are when that's all said and done. Uh, Nevada agriculture is a very, very interesting and different, non-traditional type of agriculture, especially for those of us who grew up on farms in Minnesota and thought we knew what agriculture was all about. As you probably remember, a few years ago, I went back to Minnesota and worked for the Minnesota Farm Bureau for about 2.5 years. And one of the things that struck me when I went back there was just the dynamics and the differences between what we consider agriculture here in Nevada compared to what like Minnesota would be thinking about. In Minnesota, there are over 70,000 farms and ranches in the state. Here in Nevada, USDA statistics say that we've got about 3,000 farms, and they use a very loose definition in terms of making sure that if you're a farmer, you're basically got to almost volunteer to say I am one, because otherwise it only really requires about $1,000 of income or potential income in order to classify. So we're looking at a very small percentage of people who are in Nevada and are engaged. Of Nevada's agriculture, meat animals are almost half of what is in the metrics of how much, where cash comes from in the state. Poultry is very small. Big crops is also a small percentage, with dairy about 20%. So you're looking at a very small type of size of ag. Based on January 1st, 2021's ag statistics reports, we see that in Nevada there are about 245,000 beef cattle and about 59,000 sheep that are reported in that report, and this graph basically breaks out where, again, meat animals figure into the whole metrics of Nevada agriculture and its economy. I went back over the past number of years and looked at a few of the different things that Nevada beef producers are really reliant on the use of federally managed lands in order to be in business. When 87% of the state is in rangelands or is in under federal management, you've got some very limited opportunities. And so I went through and broke down and kind of did a crosswalk between where USDA statistics are and how they categorize. This is using the 2017 census. Every 5 years, Ag Statistics does a census. And the last one that we're working off is 2017. There will be another one done this year, which will be available then in 2023. But when you look at the breakout that they've got in terms of what size of herds that there are in the state and how many producers are involved in that, as well as then the number of animals in each of those separate categories, you can see that in that about somewhere between 50 and 99 head of animals is where you start getting into, I think, what would be considered a commercial sized operation, at least to fit within the scope of maybe using federal lands for grazing. Otherwise, they are probably using smaller private pastures or other kinds of operations, maybe a feedlot type situation. In the herd sizes from 100 to 200, you see there that there's about 123 producers. The long and the short of all of that is when you add those number of producers starting at that category and working your way down, you come up with about 558 producers, which somewhat correlates with that 540 authorizations that BLM has for using cattle and yearlings and bison for their classifications. The bulk of the size of the herd, or the biggest chunk of the number of animals or herds that are in there is in that range of 200 to 500, 500 to 1,000, or 1,000 to 2,500 animals. Those are kind of the central. It's kind of like a bell-shaped curve that has a number of producers who are involved there, but it gives you kind of an idea of where the different producers are in terms of how they fit within the production scale of ag production, or in using federally managed lands. When you total up the number of animals that fit into there, you're covered about 95%, 96% almost of the total number of cows and heifers that are in Nevada's production cycle. So again, you're dealing with the bulk of the animals, them matching up, I think, with what is going on the federally managed lands and the grazing that takes place there. I also tried to look at what the future might be what the outlook would be for the future in terms of where we are and how things might be going forward. Before I go into that, though, I think one of the things that I think we need to look at in having a better understanding and a better grasp of what the economics of livestock grazing on the federal lands would be is we need to be able to, I think, go back to relying on the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension and ag research or ag economics to be able to get into more specifics of trying to update the economic scale of where profitability can be found in the overall scheme of things, to understand what those contributions are that those ag producers are making in order to be out doing what they're doing. I know that we have maintained in the past that proper livestock grazing is good for the resource. You have ranchers that are developing waters, and from those developments are making contributions to the health and the well-being of the ecosystem, and providing water resources for wildlife and other types of uses. There is a value to be had by agricultural producers using the land and making productive use of that land to provide economic outcomes. I think then we also need to be able to identify what those numbers translate into, and I think we've lost track of that somewhat when the University of Nevada closed down their ag economic activities, and when at least in the College of Ag, and when Kendra Curtis left and went to Utah, she was doing a lot of those kinds of enterprise modeling type things that we don't have now, in order to make sure we understand what's actually happening in the business cycle of things, and understanding what the costs are as well as what the benefits that are being put out. But I thought it was interesting when Garth made mention of the fact that during his presentation that one of the values that is out there is the value of retaining rangelands for a carbon sequestration reason. And I think, again, when you start taking away the ability for federal lands to be used by agricultural producers, or you somehow reduce that, you then put the pressure on what's left of the private base that's interlocked into that, and you start seeing situations then where the operations have to do something else in order to take advantage or have an economic return on the investment that they had in their private lands. And some of those changes that they may have to make might not be something that people would be too excited about see happen on the landscape, whether it be parceling the land or other kinds of things that could happen on that private land base. But as I look into the future, I think that we're going to continue to see a downward trend that we've been having in terms of the number of the number of animals that are going across the land. As also we're probably going to see that from the 2017 report to the 2021 report, both cattle and sheep numbers declined from those ag census, and I think we're going to continue to see that trend continue as we go forward. I think drought will be a continuing problem that we'll be facing. I don't think that even though we got a pretty good snowfall, at least in parts of the area this past month, I don't think that necessarily means we're going to be having to deal with too much water as we go forward. So I think drought is going to be an issue, and drought has the dual consequence of not only having less forage produced or different kinds of forage drying up or whatever, but you're also going to have problems in making sure that water is available for livestock to be using the lands. I think input cost is going to continue to be a pinch, and we're seeing that across the scope of agriculture, as well as other things, whether there's even a margin available or not. I think we probably had a little bit of an advantage in some of the pricing that we saw in terms of livestock markets this last year, but I don't know how long that's going to continue. And I think we're going to continue to have that pressure as we go forward. And again, in my closing thoughts, I think that grazing livestock on federal lands is a very, very difficult challenge for producers to do, and to have the incentives in order to carry that out, I think is going to continue to be a challenge, and it's going to, and I don't think that we understand how we go about making sure that there are recognition of those kinds of contributions that are made, and I hope that we can continue to look at what the benefits are of livestock grazing on the federal lands, as well as how we can do a better job of grazing and do so in an economically with a return on economics. So that's after all of that pain and suffering, that's what I ended up with, and I would be glad to discuss with you guys anything you would have as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Doug. Took a few side detours to get there, but I'm very glad we got there. We have plenty of time for questions, so if anyone has any questions, throw them out there.
And I guess I would hope that we would be able, as an industry, I mean, you've got the range science side of things, and you have the livestock side of things. I think you have other interests in the general public, but I think we need to somehow all work together in terms of understanding what exactly the economic dynamics actually are in terms of today and where we are, not based on just a historic perspective, but having some type of a monitoring program that is able to collect, analyze, and deliver economic data on an ongoing basis, so that we can have some, if you're going to require livestock producers to do certain kinds of activities that don't have an economic return, you're going to no longer be able to have that be sustainable. And so somehow we have to find a way to have that economic data generated in a way that is useful for the public to understand, as well as for the industry to gain from as well.
Thank you. That's a great point.